Good morning. Man, you guys, you are the awake crowd, huh? It's like you got a couple extra hours of sleep or something. Man, don't you love that song, I Surrender All? How many of you, it's a flashback for you. It takes you back to a day a long time ago. Whenever I hear that song, I feel like finding an altar. When I was 15, 16 years old, this story is free, by the way. You don't have to pay for this one. When I was 15, 16 years old, our youth group in Lakewood, we put together a whole team that we were going to do a mission trip to my great-grandfather's church in Missouri. Trying to remember, Anita, I thought it was in the summer. Anita said it was actually either early spring or in the fall, which isn't important, other than I was at my great-grandfather's church preaching as a teenager, and I was so excited. You know, I was all gung-ho, and I preached that 20-minute sermon in 10 minutes flat, and I had an altar call at the end because that's what we were supposed to do. So I had an altar call, and I knew, man, it was going to be full, and I gave this altar call, and nobody moved. It's like this panic moment in a preacher's life when you give the altar call and no one comes forward. It's only happened here a couple times. Don't worry, don't feel bad at all, nothing. I remember, though, my great-grandfather got up. He was sitting in the back of the church. He got up and he came forward and he gave a second altar call. He rescued my altar call. I don't remember what I said, but it was nothing compared to what this man said. And then I think they played I Surrender All or a song like that. I actually think it might have been I Surrender All. And I think people who were outside of the building came in to the altar when he was done. I mean, it was full. And I remember thinking in that moment, that's what spiritual authority is really about. And it changed how I think about what I do now, and it influenced what I do. Again, that has nothing to do with anything other than it was in my head and I had to get it out. So there you go. All right, there's your freebie. Grab your Bibles. We're going to continue in our series on Joshua. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 9. I also want you to find Exodus chapter 34. And while you're doing that, everyone say good morning to Melissa Harder. Melissa's up front here. Say hello. So Melissa is Gene Harder's better half. Gene was here a couple weeks ago from Germany. Melissa decided to come out and make sure that he had done everything right. Now, she was here for a conference in the Springs this past week with their organization, so she decided to swing by and say hello. If you have any questions for her, she's just happy to be in an English-speaking worship service. She hasn't had to translate any. Have you done any translation? No, she's done no translation, so she would love to speak to you in English, so find her at some point, but she's heard this message already, so she's going to leave now. Everyone say goodbye to Melissa. Yep, that's how good this is. She didn't want to hear it again. How many of you ever feel like your life is a little bit of a roller coaster? Ups and downs, right? Succeed and it kind of feels like that's the roller coaster that our life goes in. That's exactly what is happening with the Israelites in Joshua chapter 9 right now. They've had some great ups. They've crossed the Jordan River. They've had some downs, like getting circumcised. They've conquered Jericho, which was a high, and then they go and attack Ai, and they're soundly defeated, which is a low. And then they come back and they tell God, we're sorry. Anyone ever gone through that cycle? I blow it and I tell God I'm sorry, and I blow it and I tell God I'm sorry. And now they've told God they're sorry, and they attack Ai and they conquer it. Well, now that's a high, so guess what's coming? A low. In fact, today what's going to happen is the Israelites get... Don't you love that word? What does hoodwinked mean? We got two no ideas. Blindsided. What's that? Tricked. Deceived. It's just a much more fun word to say, right? Here's one of your assignments for this week. You have to work the word hoodwinked into a conversation with another human being this week and use it in the proper context, all right? It's a great word. It means to be deceived in a spectacular manner, and that is exactly what is going to happen to the Israelites today. But in order to understand how they got hoodwinked, we need to go back to Exodus chapter 34. All right, so let's go there. And on the screen it says verse 10, but we're going to start in verse 8. Let me give you a little background on what's going on here. Moses has gone up to the mountaintop and been given the 10 Commandments. He comes down off of the mountain and finds the Israelites worshiping a golden calf, and Moses loses his mind and breaks the 10 Commandments. Now just think about that for a second. Even if it's for a really good reason, who wrote those 10 Commandments? God did. On stone, which meant he wanted them to last. And now Moses has to go back up and say to God, can I have another one? Because I broke it. Why'd you break it? Because I was angry. Anyone ever been there? Yep. So this is the moment Moses is talking to God. God kind of understands. He gets it. But listen to what happens next. Verse 8. Moses immediately threw himself to the ground and worshiped and said, Lord, if it is true that I have found favor with you, then please travel with us. Yes, this is a stubborn and rebellious people, but please forgive our iniquity and our sins. Claim us as your own special possession. The Lord replied, listen, I am making a new covenant with you in the presence of all your people. I will perform miracles that have never been performed anywhere on all the earth or in any nation. And all the people around you will see the power of the Lord, the awesome power that I will display for you. But listen carefully to everything I command you today. Then I will go ahead of you and drive out, listen to these names, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. All the ites will be gone. Be very careful, listen to this, never to make a treaty with the people who live in the land where you are going. Never do what? Never make a treaty with them. Instead, if you do, you will follow their evil ways and be trapped. See, God knows what every parent knows. Bad influences good, not the other way around. He says, if you leave them in the country, in the surrounding area, they will corrupt you. Instead, you must break down their pagan altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles. You must worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose very name is jealous, is a God who is jealous about his relationship with you. God very clearly spells out, make no treaty with the people in the promised land when you get there. Is it crystal clear? You know what's about to happen, right? Well, let's figure out how. Now turn to Joshua chapter 9. So the Israelites have conquered Ai, and they're moving westward. They're moving closer to the Mediterranean Sea, but there's still a lot of work to accomplish. Now, all the kings west of the Jordan River heard about what had happened to both Ai and Jericho he's referring to. These were the kings, see if these sound familiar, of the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who lived in the hill country and in the western foothills and along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea as far north as Lebanon mountains. Where have we heard of those people before? It's the very groups that God said, when you get to the promised land, do not make a treaty with them. Now, these are country states that dot the entire western portion of the promised land. Usually, these country states have kings, and kings have this innate desire to have more land. Well, if you've got a bunch of kings who have land, what are they going to do? They're going to fight with one another. And they were constantly at war with each other until now. These kings combined their armies to fight as one against Joshua and the Israelites. They understood that what Joshua and the Israelites had just done was coming their way. And instead of letting Joshua pick them off one by one as smaller armies, they decided we'll band together. Might makes right. Okay? Except for one country state. And that's where the problem begins. Verse 3. But when the people of Gibeon heard that what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to deception to save themselves. Gibeon decides it's not about how strong you are. Instead of using might, brawn, we're going to use our brains. We're going to see if we can outsmart Joshua and the Israelites. We've seen what happens when you go toe-to-toe with this army, so we're going to try something different. Are they supposed to make a treaty with the Gibeonites? Nope. So they sent ambassadors to Joshua, loading their donkeys with weathered saddlebags and old patched wineskins. They put on worn-out patched sandals and ragged clothes, and the bread they took with them was dry and moldy. Doesn't that sound delicious? When they arrived at the camp of Israel at Gilgal, which was only about 20 miles away, they told Joshua and the men of Israel, "We've come from a distant land to ask you to make a peace treaty with us." Do you see the ruse? What's the ruse? Yeah, guys, we're from very far away. We're not from just down the road. We're like from Commerce City, not Parker. And we've come to make a treaty with you. Now, all sorts of red bells and red flags should have been going off at this point. Because how long had Israel been in the Promised Land? We're talking weeks. In the Promised Land, it's been weeks since they crossed the Jordan River, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, some guys from a very distant country show up and say, "Hey, we'd like to make a peace treaty with you." The second problem with this is, if you live so far away, why do you need a peace treaty? If you live that far away, just stay away. We don't need you to be here. All that stuff should have been going off in their heads. And Joshua senses that something isn't right. Listen to what they say next. Verse 7. The Israelites replied to the Hivites, "How do we know you don't live nearby? For if you do, we cannot make a treaty with you." That's trouble right there. Did Joshua and the Israelites know that they couldn't make a treaty with the people in the land? Yeah, they can't claim ignorance, right? They know it, and they question, "How do we know you don't live here?" Listen to the answer. We're your servants. Did that answer the question? That's a kid answer, isn't it? Did you break this thing? I was outside. Okay, that didn't answer the question even a little bit, right? But still, Joshua senses something is up. "But who are you?" Joshua demanded. "Where do you come from?" Which is the important question. Where do you come from? They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country. We have heard of the might of the Lord your God and all that he did in Egypt." Oh, what are they doing now? Sucking up. "We've also heard what he did to the two Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth." That's something that happened 40 years ago. They were smart enough not to say, "We heard about Jericho." No, that happened 2 days ago. We heard about that. No. "So our elders and all our people instructed us, take supplies for a long journey. Go meet with the people of Israel and tell them, 'We're your servants. Please make a treaty with us. This bread was hot from the ovens when we left our homes, but now, as you can see, it's dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, but now they're old and split open, and our clothing and sandals are worn out from our very long journey.'" Joshua has a puzzle to solve, doesn't he? Does he want to make a treaty? No. The answer is yes. If you can make a treaty as a leader of people who are going to go into war, what does a treaty buy you? You don't have to go to war. You don't have to kill anybody. No one of your people have to be killed. And if you can set up a treaty, it's a great thing. If they're from far away, I can set up a treaty with them, and it's not going to have anything to do with what God is doing now. He'd like to make a treaty, but the problem is God said, don't make a treaty with anyone who lives in the Promised Land. So what Joshua has to figure out is, do they live here or not? He's trying to decide, are they telling me the truth? He's trying to solve the puzzle. And he does what most of us do when we're faced with a dilemma in our lives. We try to figure it out on our own. Men, look at me. We try and figure it out on our own, don't we? You ever gotten one of those pieced together furniture things? There's a booklet that comes in it. I've never read it. I hear it's called an instruction booklet. As soon as I get it, I burn it. Because I don't need instructions. I'm a man. I can figure this out. And if there are 5 pieces left over, they're probably just extras. Because if I ask for help, I don't ask for directions. I'm never lost. We're just taking the scenic route. We'll get there eventually. Man, we don't want to ask for directions. We don't want to ask for help because asking for help means weakness. I can figure this out, which is great as long as you can figure it out. But when you can't figure it out, all kinds of things go wrong. Now listen to what Joshua does at the beginning of verse 14. So the Israelites examined their food. I've got a puzzle to solve, so I'm going to look at all the evidence. I'm going to look at their food. What did they find? Dry, moldy bread and old wine. Well, problem solved. Because you can't get old, dry, moldy bread anywhere else unless you've taken a long journey, right? Anyone ever put a piece of bread out on the counter? Even in America, where we load it full of preservatives, how long before that piece of bread is dry and gross? You get an hour, day and a half. Let's push it to 3 days. And that's in America, where we load it. By the way, just since Melissa's not here, we had bread in Germany. Oh. You don't know what bread is, because it's like pure and fresh. They bring it every day. Because if you get day-old bread in Germany, it's dry and moldy and gross. So let's just push it and say 6 days. Let's say they had really good systems and they could keep their bread dry or not dry for 6 days. That means they were how far away? 6 days. At the most. And by the way, could they have just left the bread out? Could they have just left the wineskins out? Did examining the food do anything? No. It's what happens next that causes the problem. By the way, let's go back to the problem at Ai. What was the sin at Ai? Or at Jericho? Achan. What did Achan do? He took the robe, he took the gold. But here's the thing. God said, don't take anything, and what did Achan do? He took it. What's about to happen here is a different kind of sin. See, what Achan did, and we've all done this. God said, don't touch it, and what do? We touch it. Don't do this. I mean, this is the story from the very beginning. God tells Adam and Eve, don't eat this tree. And there's something in us that says, I mean, as soon as you tell a kid, don't touch, what do? Touch it. It's built within us, right? Don't do it, and we do it. What's about to happen here is different. What's about to happen here, I think the theological term I'm looking for is stupidity. None of us have ever done anything stupid, have we? There's a bumper sticker. I want to get it and put it on my car. It says, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes that reason is because you're stupid and make bad decisions. What's about to happen is Joshua is about to make a really bad decision. Let's read verse 14 again. So the Israelites examined their food, but they did not consult the Lord. What did they not do? They didn't ask God. Then Joshua made a peace treaty with them and guaranteed their safety, and the leaders of the community ratified their agreement with a binding oath. There's a couple things going on here that we need to understand, because this is not something we do a lot in our culture. So first of all, Joshua didn't just make a peace treaty. What is a peace treaty? It's not a trick question. Yeah, I promise not to attack you. You promise not to attack me. It's like we do with our kids, right? You stay in your room, you stay in your room, and there will not be war as long as you stay separated. But as soon as you come together, it's going to happen. That's a peace treaty. I'll leave you alone, you leave me alone. But Joshua went one step further. He guaranteed their safety. Joshua said, not only will we make a peace treaty with you, but if anyone attacks you, we will come to your rescue. And then he did the worst thing. He made it a binding oath by swearing to it on God's name. On God's name, I'm making this peace treaty and this guarantee of safety with you. Now, you and I see the problem, right? Is this a treaty that they can uphold? Are they supposed to be making this treaty? No, but they didn't ask. Now, you and I, we've got a solution to this problem, right? Would we accept this contract as a binding contract between us and the other party? No. Why not? Because they lied. You lied to me, so therefore the contract that we're making is null and void. It doesn't count because you did this under false pretenses, which would have been fine except for one thing. They swore on it on God's name. And God says, when you swear something on my name, it is binding. You're stuck with it. Well, now they've got a problem, don't they? Listen to what happens next. 3 days after making the treaty, they learn that these people actually live nearby. Bum, bum, bum. Who saw that one coming? The Israelites set out at once to investigate and reached their towns in 3 days. The names of these towns were Gibeon and other things that are very hard to say. But the Israelites did not attack the towns, for the Israelite leaders had made a vow to them in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. The people of Israel grumbled against their leaders because of the treaty. But the leaders replied, since we have sworn an oath in the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel, we cannot touch them, which is interesting in and of itself. We went before God and said we're making an oath about these people, but we never asked him whether we should. The theological term for that is stupid. This is what we must do. We must let them live. Verse 20. We must let them live, for divine anger would come upon us if we broke our oath. Let them live. So they made them woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community as the Israelite leaders directed. Verse 22 is hilarious to me. So Joshua gathered together the Gibeonites and said, why did you lie to us? Why did you say that you lived in a distant land when you live right here among us? May you be cursed. From now on, you will always be servants who cut wood and carry water for the house of my God. They replied, we did it because we, your servants, were clearly told that the Lord your God commanded his servant Moses to give you this entire land and to destroy all the people living in it. Was that true? Yes. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you. That is why we have done this. Now we're at your mercy. Do to us whatever you think is right. This conversation is silly. Why did you lie to us? Because you were going to kill us. Well, we're going to make you woodcutters and water carriers. Okay. Better that than dead. Pretty simple conversation. So Joshua did not allow the people of Israel to kill them, but that day he made the Gibeonites the woodcutters and water carriers for the community of Israel and for the altar of the Lord, wherever the Lord would choose to build it, and that is what they do to this day. And this treaty held for 350 years. The Gibeonites lived right where they were, in the midst of Israel. They were the woodcutters and water carriers for 3.5 centuries, until a guy by the name of King Saul came along and said, I'm going to kill the Gibeonites. And he did. And then King David became king, and there was a famine for 3 years in the land. And David comes to God and says, God, why is there a famine? Don't ask me why it took him 3 years, but it did. God, why is there a famine in the land? And God said, it's because you broke the treaty with the Gibeonites. Now, you and I would say, you got to be kidding me. We made that thing 350 years ago, and it wasn't me, it was somebody I don't even know. And God said, but it was sworn on my name. And when you swear on my name, you better mean it, because it's binding. Saul broke it, and the Israelites paid the promise 350 years later. Now, there's a lesson here, isn't there? Should you and I swear on God's name? Actually, if you go to Matthew chapter 7, Jesus said, do not swear on heaven or earth. Do not swear in God's name. Do not make an oath in God's name. Jesus said, instead, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Because Jesus knew when you swear on God's name, it's binding and you better mean it. And so while I was going through this, I was all excited. All right, here's our lesson for the week. Don't go making oaths in Jesus' name. And if you do make an oath in God's name, you better mean it. Here's the problem with that lesson. We don't do this. When was the last time anyone ever swore on God's name? Anyone ever done it? Okay, yeah. Where did you do it? In court. Right? They brought one of these. Now you're all raised your hands like I shouldn't have raised my hand. Now they all know I went to court. They bring one of these out and they put your hand on it and you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. and that you're swearing on the Bible. That meant something once upon a time. It doesn't really mean anything anymore, does it? In fact, in most courtrooms, they don't even do it anymore. They say something different. They've taken the God part off. Not because it's so serious, but because it doesn't mean anything. And Jesus said, don't do it. So it's actually kind of a hard lesson to teach. Don't swear on God's name because Jesus said so. Okay, we don't do it anyway. You see how that kind of falls flat? So that's not our lesson. That was a bonus. What's the real lesson in this story? It's a simple lesson. Ask God. See, what the Israelites did was they stood at the edge of the plain and they said, I got an idea. We're going to skydive today, but I'm so smart, I don't need a parachute. And so we're going to jump out, right? They made this treaty, jumped out of the plane, and then about 2,000 feet off the ground decided, wait a minute, that was a bad idea. I really could use a parachute. And it's like asking God, God, would you make a parachute magically appear on me right now? And we've all prayed that prayer at one point in our lives, haven't we? We didn't ask God. We went and did what we wanted to anyway. And what do we want God to do at the very end? We want him to fix it, solve it. Here's a situation where God said, I can't solve it. You're between a rock and a hard place. You weren't supposed to make the treaty, but you didn't ask me. You made the treaty anyway, and then you made it in my name. That's not smart, is it? What's the answer to this dilemma? Instead of asking God at the end, when should we ask him? Oswald Chambers says this, too often we use prayer as a last resort when God wants us to use it before we do anything at all. That's the lesson of Joshua chapter 9. And we're going to see in Joshua chapter 10 how quickly Israel pays the price for making this treaty. Because here's what's happening. Here's a little precursor. Here's what happens in chapters 10 and 11. Well, yet all these nation states that had banded together, right, except for Gibeonites, who made a treaty with the Israelites. Well, these kings decide, instead of attacking this big army, we want to take our aggression out on somebody, so guess who they decided to attack? The Gibeonites. If you're not for us, you're against us. And they attacked the Gibeonites, but Israel promised to protect them. You see, if they'd have just stayed out of it, they might have attacked them anyway and solved their problem for them, but now Israel has to come to the rescue of the Gibeonites. And we're going to find out what that means for us next week. Here's the simple lesson. Don't get hoodwinked. Consult God. How do you not get hoodwinked? Consult God first. So you got to put it in the right order. We need to consult God before you do something. So I want you to grab your Bibles and turn to James chapter 1, which right now you should be terrified. Because anytime a pastor says turn to James, you know it's going to be hard. James chapter 1, verse 5. How am I doing on time? That's time for an extra sermon. It's the last service. We got to beat the Baptists to lunch, right? James 1:5. If you need wisdom, how many of you could use a little wisdom in your lives? All right, James is going to tell you, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. Men, Scripture says God will not make fun of you. He will not rebuke you. Nothing is going to happen if you ask God for wisdom, except he'll give it to you. Isn't that a great promise? If you need wisdom, and we all raised our hands, ask God and he'll give you wisdom. Doesn't that all sound great? What's the next word? But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver. For a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they're unstable in everything that they do. For a long time, those last verses confused me. God says if I ask him, he'll give me wisdom. But he says I need to have faith in him and not have a divided loyalty between him and the world. Is he going to give it to me or not? Because if your faith isn't in him, if your loyalty is divided, you shouldn't expect to receive anything. The point is, if you trust him, when you ask him that he's going to give you an answer and you're going to do something with it, then you're going to get everything that you need. But here's what we sometimes do. God, okay, maybe just me. God, I have this problem and I'd like an answer. And God gives me an answer and I look at that answer and I compare this answer to the answer that the world gives me. This is what the world says I should do. This is what God says I should do. And I start to weigh them. As soon as I start to weigh them, my loyalty is divided. Isn't it? This is inspecting the food. This is asking God. God, what's the answer? And here's the problem, at least I have. I'm sure you are all way more holy than I am. I'm afraid I'm going to get one of two answers from God. Either the answer is going to be too simple or it's going to be too hard. See, the simple answers I don't trust. They seem too simple. Like, hey God, should I make a treaty with these people? The answer would be no. In fact, what you should probably do is kill them. Whoa, slow the roll. Hold on. That's craziness. They're just trying to make peace. I know, kill them. God, maybe you didn't understand the question. They're trying to make peace. Should I make a treaty with them? No, kill them. I don't know if I like that answer, right? Or sometimes the answer is going to be very complicated. It's going to be hard. It's not going to make any sense. Like, God, how do we defeat Jericho? March around it, don't make any noise, and then at the last minute, I want you to shout and the walls are going to come down. God, what I'd like you to do right now is make sense. And what we mean when we say I want you to make sense is I either want it my way or I want the answer to be what the world would do. That's divided loyalty. What James says is when you ask God, if you don't want to get hoodwinked, before you get the answer, you trust the answer. Before you get it, you tell God and you mean it. I'm going to do what you ask me to do. Before I know the results, I'm going to do it. Just like I'm going to march around the wall until the wall comes down. I got to tell you, I had a hard time with this whole message because it sounds really simple. And it sounds like something we've heard over and over and over again. And that's what happens when our lives are roller coasters. We need to hear these lessons over and over again, don't we? Is it simple? Don't get hoodwinked, consult God? Yeah, it's simple. So why don't we do it? Why don't I do it? Why do I wait to ask God when I'm 2,000 feet off the ground? Instead of talking to him, God, what should I do? Put on a parachute. Hey, good idea. I wish I had thought of that, right? So what are you going to do this week? You have two assignments. Use hoodwinked in a sentence, and then don't get hoodwinked. Consult God before you do anything. Let me tell you this. Asking God is never the wrong answer. Never. In fact, let me put it to you this way. Asking God is never, ever, ever, never, ever, ever, never, never, ever, ever the wrong answer. Period. Not asking God is always the wrong answer. Let's stand and pray. Father, I got to tell you, and I've said this a couple times already this morning, this lesson seems too obvious. It seems too easy. Of course we're supposed to ask you. Of course we're supposed to consult you. Of course we're supposed to bring our problems to you. But Joshua didn't do it. And too often when I look back in my life, I haven't done it. I've tried to solve the problem. I've tried to do it on my own. I've tried to even spiritualize that by saying, God has given me all the tools that I need if I'll just use them. When really the one tool you want us to use is to come to you to ask for help. Because you are a jealous God. You care about our relationship. You want us to come to you to ask what to do and to have a conversation about that. And even if the thing seems too simple or it seems too hard, to have that conversation. But in the end, trust that you're going to come true, that your answer is the right answer, that if we'll do what you ask us to do, we'll have the victory we want in the first place. But Father, for some reason, we walk through these doors and we don't do it. So help us. Help us to remember to consult you first, not to get hoodwinked, not to believe what the world tells us, but to believe what you tell us. Because what you tell us is true every time. Father, let us consult you first before we do anything and trust that the answer is the right answer. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen.